Welcome to part 2 of my video of reloading military Berdan prime cases for the 6.5 by 55 Swedish Mauser. In part 1 we talked mainly about the difference between the types of Berdan and Boxer prime cases, and we demonstrated the use of the hydraulic decapping tool. In this one I'm just going to show you how to quickly decap a batch of cases as if we were reloading a batch, and then we'll just go through some pointers on general reloading techniques for this cartridge. Okay, now I'm going to deprime 10 once fired Swedish Mauser military cases. I won't absolutely rush, but I'll do it fairly quickly just to show you how quickly you can do a batch of cases using this method. Okay, so here we go. Put that on there. There's one. Not sure if that one worked. No, that one didn't work. Two. You can actually feel it give as the primer pops out, so you can generally tell whether it worked or not. The only other reason it doesn't work is because the punch goes down too quickly. The water just leaks out too quickly before you have a chance to do it. As long as the punch stays up like that. See, that one didn't work. Try that one again. That's a tough one. Worked that time. You can see occasionally they need more than one bang to get them out. Try it again. Eight. Nine. Last one. I think that did come out. That's 10. What do you do? Right, the next step in processing our cases, now that we've decapped them, is to trim them to length, so that we've got an even length. Now, on all my cartridge reloading, I actually use the Lee system, which is very simple and cheap. I know there's other much fancier tools available for little benchtop ones that will trim as well as do other things to cases, but I find the Lee system's quite simple. Now, with the Lee system, what you generally do is you have a special collet that's for a specific cartridge. Now, that one there is for the 270 Winchester, and that screws into a cutter like that. And what that does, this is obviously not going to go in because it's the wrong diameter, is that goes into the 270 case, which is held in a case holder like this. So if we pretend that's a 270, that sits in the case holder like that. You put that through into the case. The tip of this pin will now come in contact, go through the primer hole, and come in contact with that. And that's actually, that distance from there to there is what actually determines the trim length for the case. Now, obviously, we come up to the same dilemma. That's not going to work with a Berdan case because it can't come through. So what I did to get around that was I bought the proper little collet for the 6.5 case. I worked out the case length, trim length, just from a normal reloading guide. I don't have it in my head at the moment, but and basically what I did is, by method of trial and error, I just bought these. And if you're only going to do the 6.5s, you could buy these little tools for next to nothing to be able to do them. I just started grinding off the tip there, having it on the tool, trimming and trimming until the tip there hit the bottom of the case, and just kept on grinding it off till I got to the point where it was trimming the case to the required length. So that's all set up to do that. So we can just, now it's a lot easier to do this with a drill if you're doing a quantity, but I'll just do it by hand now just to show you. You can feel it cutting the brass, and I can see the little slivers of brass going onto the desk. Now suddenly it's got much easier, because it's the little bit at the end is obviously now sitting in the end of the case. So there we go. So we've trimmed that case to the required length. Now anyone who's done any reloading will be familiar with the next step. It's just the same. I'll get the little inside and outside deburrer just to get that burr off that we've created. Alright, and there we have the case all trimmed to length. Now generally what I would do if I'm doing a quantity of cases is I would chuck this in a drill, so that you can just push the drill and it only takes a second. So I might even go and get the drill, and I'll give you a quick demo of that. Alright, here we are. We've put the case holder in the drill and chucked a case in it. Put the case trimmer in. There we go. It's just stopped cutting just then. You can hear the drill motor sort of stops working so hard once it stops cutting the brass, and we'll just chamfer that. Alright, now let's have a look. I've got the quantity manual here, and I don't know if you can read that. It says here case trim length 2.155 inches, and if we measure that case, that's actually 2.157 inches, so it's pretty close to what we're after. They say the case trim length is 2.155 and the maximum case length is a 2.165, so we're well short of the maximum case length, and as well as we can, that system's going to fairly well trim each case to the same length, which is what we're after, is consistency. Okay, so we've got our case decap trimmed to length. Now we've got to prepare the primer pocket. Now of course in a normal Berdan primed case, a normal boxer prime case, all you do is just use your little case cleaner, one of these things here, and you just kind of put it in and give it a little twist, and it cleans the case. But of course it doesn't work on this one because we've got this great anvil sitting in the way, and we can see the remains. You may not be able to see it, but there is the remains of that green, turn it around and see if you can see it, that green glue in there. Only very small touch holes, so it's probably quite important not to leave any debris in the case. Now you can use anything. I've just got this little thing, it's like a tiny little screwdriver that came with something, just small enough to run around the circumference of the anvil. Give it a blow, and make sure that whatever you've cleaned out isn't sitting in the little tiny touch holes, which it often is. Anyway, we've got that pretty well clean now. There you go. You can see the end of the anvil shining where I've kind of scraped it a little bit, but you can actually see the touch holes there. There we go. So that's nice and clean. Now, next problem is we've got these 3 stake marks in here, which is they're actually protruding out into the primer pocket, and that's going to stop the primer sliding in neatly. And as you'll see when we get to the priming section, it's quite important to do everything you can to make sure the primer slides in evenly, because the military primers in these are slightly smaller than your standard large rifle boxer primer, so it doesn't fit in any tool that you have perfectly. So you've got to do everything you can to help it to go in. Now what I do is I've just got this old knife here that I've actually ground the point so it's a bit blunter, and I just put it in here and have it about 45 degrees to the edge of the pocket and just run it around the pocket. Now you can feel it clicking over the little, there's one there, the little crimps. So go around until you can no longer feel that clicking, so to show that the crimps have been removed. Now this does two things. It removes those crimps, but the other thing it does is it creates, you probably might see it shining there, it creates a little 45-ish degree lip leading into the case, which I've got some bits of brass in there, so make sure anything that you're doing doesn't go in and block those little tiny touch holes. That'll help the primer find its way into the case, as you'll see shortly. Okay, here we have the two different types of primers that are available. These are the standard boxer primers that you're probably familiar with. You can see that the ones that are pointing upwards, they have a little three-sided metal anvil in them. Now this is how the Berdan primers come. These are Nobel ones. They come in this cardboard packet of 250. They aren't in little individual things, they're just loose in the packet. As you can see, though, I haven't got many left. And we'll just get one and we'll see if you can see it. If you look at the primer, there's no anvil, if you can see that, and just a little dent where the integral case anvil in the case sits in the dent in the primer. Now I know there's a lot of discussion about how hard Berdan primers can be to find. I've had these for quite a number of years. I bought several thousand. This is the last packet I've got, so I'm going to have to buy some shortly. But in case you're looking for them and you're going to ring around to try to find some at your reloading suppliers, the primer number for these is 5627 for Dynamit Noble ones. They're 5.5mm primers, so that's what you need to ask for if you're going to do some research to try to find some. That concludes part 2 of my video, which mainly involved preparing our already decapped case for reloading. In part 3 we'll talk about general reloading techniques, priming, charging, bullet seating and checking our rounds. So I'll see you then. In part 3 of my 3-part video we'll discuss sizing, priming the case, charging, bullet seating, and then we'll look at just checking our rounds in a rifle. Out of the die and just remove the end and taken the decapping pin out, so it doesn't actually have a decapping pin in it. Some dies, the lead dies, you can't actually do that. What you can do, they're designed very similar to this. You can actually undo this, the top part, so that the expander rod sits further into the die, so that the actual decapping pin doesn't actually contact the bottom of the case. So you have to just look at your dimensions if you're going to do that, and that should work as well. Now I'll just screw that into my die. Now you may know that most military 19th century military rifles, 19th, 20th century, have very generous chambers, because they have to work in mud and snow and just general assorted other rubbish, and still be able to chamber the round. If the chambers were too tight on the cartridge with minimal tolerances, the soldiers would have trouble chambering the round in harsh conditions. So they have fairly generous chambers, but that's not really conducive to accuracy. So I've sort of come up with a way of getting around that. What I do is, now if you've picked up your case from someone else's rifle or off the ground, you're going to need to full length resize it first time, just as you would any other rifle case. So you have your die set so that the case holder touches the die, and full length resize it. Now all of these cases have been fired in my rifle, and what I do is I actually have my die turned out a few turns so that the die is maybe 1/16 inch from the case holder is about 1/16 inch from touching the die when I lift the ram up, and what that means is it will neck size the case down to a point about 1/16 inch in front of the shoulder. Now once it's done, you can actually see that, and what that does is it creates a tiny little bulge in the case there, so that when it's chambered, that's going to tend to hold the projectile in the centre of the bore, rather than sitting in the bottom of an oversized chamber, and there being a bigger space on top of the projectile than below it as it goes into the rifling. I started doing this quite a number of years ago when I first started reloading for my 6.5, and I found it made it markedly more accurate. Okay, here we are with our case, so we'll lubricate the neck and the body as normal reloading procedure. These dies haven't been used for a while, so there's probably a bit of probably not going to be so smooth, but all right. So there's our case. Now I can actually see. I'm not sure if the camera will have enough resolution, but if you look at that neck of that case, you can actually see the point where the neck's been sized to, but then there's a point just above where the shoulder goes onto the neck where it hasn't been sized. Now for all my reloading I use the simple Lee hand primer. I know a lot of shooters do use the press mounted priming tools. I've got one on my RCBS rock chucker, which I have used in the past. I don't recommend using it for doing these Berdan primers, however, because you really need to be able to feel the primer going into the pocket, which you can't really do with the great leverage of press mounted primer. I had a friend that tried to do it with an RCBS rock chucker one, and he managed to crush a primer as it was going into the case, and it actually exploded. No damage and no injury, but he said it scared the hell out of him and he never did it again. So I've loaded thousands of Berdan primers into Swedish Mauser cases with this particular tool, and I've never had any problem. However, what you have to realise is that the hole here is designed for standard large rifle boxer primers. They're a standard size. I'm not sure of the exact dimensions. They're probably imperial. However, these Berdan primers are 5.5mm. They're slightly smaller. Now, what we do, you can load them into this and feed them out of that as normal. It will work, but I'll just put one in for now just to show you. Make sure you wear your glasses. I'll just put mine on now, because you know, they're probably more amenable to being crushed than your standard primers. So just for safety's sake, we've got our case. Here we are. I now have the correct shell holder in, which I didn't before. This is the number 3 Lee shell holder, which is the correct one. Excuse me, the correct one for the 6.5 by 55. It also fits. The case is based on the 30-30, so the 30-30 and the 32 Winchester Special on 38-55, etc. So it's the same one. All right. Now what we do is we don't just give it a good old push and jam it in, because it doesn't fit, the primers aren't exactly right. So what I've done now is I've just got a little bit of pressure so that the primer's touching the bottom of the case. Now what I do is I don't know if you actually saw that little vibration. As I rotated the case and moved it slightly in the shell holder, the primer found that little 45-degree shoulder that I put on the primer pocket, and it started going in. So I'm confident now that it's started. I'll give it a press, and there we go. Now if you feel that primer is actually just slightly below. Okay, we'll do another one. So I've put that fully into the shell holder there. Now just let me position myself properly. Hold the case with your left hand, put a little bit of pressure on there. Now it's touching the bottom of the case. Now I'm going to, okay, I just rotated the case and moved it slightly, and I felt the primer start to centre itself in the pocket. So I'm confident now that I can push that, and there we go. If you don't do that, if you just stick the case in and then squeeze your handle as you would for a normal Berdan prime case, you'll end up crushing the edges of a lot of the primers. You'll just buckle the edge a little bit, and then of course it won't slide into the primer pocket, and you'll have to kind of pull it out and start again and discard a primer. And these primers are 2 to 3 times the expense of normal primers, so you want to avoid that if you can. But with practice you won't waste any. So there we have it. We have a trimmed to length, deprimed and reprimed and neck sized Swedish Mauser case ready for reloading. Charging and bullet seating is pretty much the same as using normal boxer prime cases. I'm using 42 grains of AR2209, which is an Australian made powder made by Australian Defence Industries. It's sold in the US as Hodgdon 4350, it's the same powder. So if you look up your Hodgdon reloading manual, you can get your loads for that. Of course there's plenty of other good powders for the 6.5, but this one is particularly popular, and I've found it's a very good powder for the 6.5. So we'll just wait till that throws us 42 grains. And wait for it to even out. There we go, 42. Alright, so the projectiles I'm using are 140 grain Remington soft points. These are bulk projectiles. They're reasonably cheap, but they shoot probably as well as the military Swedish Mauser is able to. Now the barrel twist and the chamber on the Swedish Mauser is actually designed for 139 grain military ammo, so you know, if you're looking for accuracy, 140s are probably good ones to use. I have a friend who hunts with a sporterised Swedish Mauser. He uses 120s and gets very good results, so there's no reason you can't use those, but I use these 140s. Now we'll just seat that bullet on that charged case. And there we have it, a ready to fire 6.5 by Swedish 555 Swedish Mauser military case, fully reloaded. And of course, now that we've got that replacement primer, they're much easier to prime the second, third, fourth and subsequent times. Right, now I'm going to show you how to go about safely checking your reloads in the chamber of your Model 96 6.5 Swedish rifle. It's a good idea to do this just to make sure that they chamber freely, especially if you're using it for target competitions or hunting. So what you need to do first of all is cock the rifle. It's a cock on closing bolt, of course. Righto, so we've got our cocking piece is now protruding here. We know the rifle is cocked. Now what you've got to do is lift the safety tab so that it's pointing straight up, so it's neither on the fire or the safe position but straight up, and then go ahead and remove the bolt. Right, so now there we've got the bolt is cocked, as you can see. Cocking piece is sticking out, and you'll find that that can now easily be unscrewed. That's still cocked, that bolt, but it was unscrewed without any effort. You can also use this obviously if you want to clean and lubricate your striker. The beauty of being able to do this now is now we have the bolt without any striker mechanism in it. I can put that back in the rifle, and there's no way that rifle can fire because it doesn't actually have a firing pin. So what we can do now is get some of our reloads, load them in, and we can make sure that they chamber. So there's a safe way of doing this, you know, where you otherwise at home, where you otherwise wouldn't think of chambering a live round in a rifle. So we'll just chamber these rounds one by one. There we go. So you can see that those rounds all chambered quite freely. All of these are neck sized, and the bullets are seated in the case approximately 1 bullet diameter. So that shows in my rifle anyway that they're all ready to shoot in that rifle. So I would recommend after you load just a few rounds, go through that process and make sure they chamber well in your rifle. Right, to get our rifle back to standard condition, just get out of the way so you can see that. Okay, so you'll see when that screws up, that comes up straight so that the safety tab is parallel with the bolt handle. You can now put that bolt in, close it, put it back down onto the fire position. So now the rifle's now again in cocked and ready to fire. And obviously if we open the bolt and pull the trigger, close the bolt, and it's now back to being uncocked. And that concludes my 3-part video on reloading 6.5 military cases to produce fireable cartridges. I'm going to post one more video just generally on the use of my decapping tool for doing other calibers, so you may be interested in that. I'll see you.